breaking the curse of evil. There is a contagious psychospiritual disease of the human soul, a parasite of the mind that is currently manifesting itself in the form of unprecedented conflicts and crises on a global scale. This collective psychosis or mental virus, which the Native Americans have called Wetiko, covertly operates through the unconscious blind spots in the human psyche, rendering us oblivious to our own madness and compelling us to act against our own best interests. Wetiko distorts our perceptions by stealth and subterfuge, acting through us while simultaneously remaining hidden. Unconstrained by conventional laws of time and space, this bug in the system deceives us by working with the projective tendencies of our mind to appear external to and other than ourselves. Thus, the conflicts and crises which threaten the collapse of political, social and economic systems, and perhaps even of the biosphere itself, are nothing less than a revelation of our own internal darkness, a side of our nature that we all too often deny. Quantum physics is now revealing to us the dreamlike nature of reality, and as with our dreams at night, events in the so-called waking world are symbolically reflecting a condition deep within the psyche of humanity. Drawing on insights from Jungian psychology, shamanism, alchemy, spiritual wisdom traditions, and personal experience, Levy shows us that hidden within the venom of Wetiko is both a profound truth and an antidote, which once recognized can help us awaken and restore sanity to society.
As each of the various names is illuminating a different facet of whatever it is we call it. We can even invent our own name, as long as it helps us to dispel the curse of not knowing the name. From this point forward, I am choosing to use the mantric name of the disease, that is, Wetiko, for a number of reasons. To introduce this indigenous word into the popular vernacular, as well as to honor the indigenous traditions that have created this word, in addition to wanting to access the power inherent in its mantric energy, and finally, because it sounds right. A disease of civilization. In order for our minds to comprehend something, there must be an appropriately structured neural structure called a frame that makes it possible to contextualize, make proper sense of, and mentally see the thing. Our understanding of the world is frame-dependent. Frames are the accessories with which we think. Frames are the cognitive, conceptual structures that enable us to put together, amplify, and activate ideas. When a truth is unseen, it is because it is both unframed and unnamed. Frames and names go together. A major reason why Wetiko remains incomprehensible to us is that, in addition to not knowing its name, we are operating out of frames that render it invisible and unknowable. Wetiko is a semantic disorder that functions by deviating the very process by which we attribute meaning to our experience. It is, therefore, important to establish a proper frame in order to see it. In framing our situation, it is important to recognize that one mode through which Wetiko operates on our mind is through the activity of framing itself. Improper frames can be one of the most pernicious factors distorting our mind's capacity to see reality clearly. In light of the very principle of framing, understanding frames requires a frame to be created so as to be able to appreciate the importance of framing. Words and language are elements of, defined by, and understood relative to frames. Without a word activating a frame, there is not a way for the mind to grasp the concept, reality, to which the word is referring. This book is an effort to name and construct a conceptual frame around the complex idea of Wetiko. Bringing forth the name associated with this syndrome activates the conceptual frame to which it is linked. The combination of the frame and name acts as a net or container which catches Wetiko. It is not a coincidence that the development of Wetiko corresponds to the rise of what Europeans choose to call civilization. The unsustainable nature of industrial civilization is based on, and increasingly requires, violence to maintain itself. A modern idiom for Wetiko, malignant egophrenia, is Wetiko, translated into the English language. Most of the Native American literature I've found on the topic talks about the mythic dimension of Wetiko in the sense that the Wetiko monster is a sort of supernatural boogeyman who lives in the forest and who can eat or possess people. Of course, this can be read symbolically to represent a psychological potential within ourselves. I very much appreciate Jack Forbes's work, which translates the ancient indigenous mythology into a more psychological form, showing how it plays itself out in the modern world. In this book, I've unfolded and amplified the indigenous idea of Wetiko, as well as Forbes's conception of it as a psychological disease, based on my own living experience. Hopefully, in doing so, I've fleshed out the deeper psychospiritual underpinnings of the myth, while at the same time attempting to honor the indigenous tradition and translate its wisdom into a modern idiom. Giving myself creative license once again, for this certification does not have an expiration date, we quickly realized that malignant egophrenia could be shortened to ME disease, which sounded like and suggested what it meant. The name, ME disease, is pointing to the very essence of what the problem is. That is, the grasping onto an imagined me, a sense of an independent egoic self, which doesn't exist in the way we think it does. This clinging on to a false sense of self, this self-contraction around a false identity, is itself both the source of and the expression of Wetiko malignant egophrenia, hence, me disease. Speaking about this very same psychic epidemic, Forbes writes, "For several thousands of years, human beings have suffered from a plague, a disease worse than leprosy, a sickness worse than malaria, a malady much more terrible than smallpox. Indigenous people have been tracking the same psychic virus for many centuries, calling it Wetiko in Cree, Windigo in Ojibwa, Wintiko in Powhatan, a term that refers to a diabolically wicked person or spirit who terrorizes others by means of evil acts." Professor Forbes, who was one of the founders of the Native American movement during the early 60s, says, "Tragically, the history of the world for the past 2,000 years is, in great part, the story of the epidemiology of the Wetiko disease. Wetiko malignant egophrenia is a psychosis in the true sense of the word, a sickness of the soul or spirit. Though calling it by different names, Forbes and I are both pointing to the same illness of the psyche, soul and spirit that has been at the root of humanity's inhumanity to itself. There is no possibility of awakening from our collective nightmare without first becoming aware of what it is that is keeping us asleep. As if performing a magic ritual, in exploring the entity of Wetiko malignant egophrenia, we first have to invoke its spirit and enter into a relationship with it. Wetiko malignant egophrenia needs to be contemplated religiously, not in the dogmatic sense, but in the true meaning of the word, that is, carefully considering, with a sense of awe and reverence, a living and dynamic agency that is conceived of and experienced as a numinous power greater than our own ego. We must contemplate and engage Wetiko malignant egophrenia as objectively as we are able, as if it exists outside of ourselves, lest we get too mixed up with the object of our contemplation. Due to its unique psychic origin, the epidemiology of Wetiko malignant egophrenia is different from that of any other disease. An intrinsic challenge to our investigation of the Wetiko malignant egophrenia virus is that it is incarnating in the very psyche which itself is the means of our investigation. We therefore need to examine the disease from a perspective that is as free as possible from assumptions created by the very disease being studied. If we are not aware of the frame of reference through which we are examining the Wetiko malignant egophrenia virus, our investigation will be tainted by the disease, obscuring the clear vision needed to start the healing process. Studying how Wetiko malignant egophrenia disease manifests in others, as well as in the other part of ourselves, will help us to see it more objectively. Seeing this psychological disease manifesting in the world is the looking glass through which we can potentially recognize this same illness as it arises subjectively within our own minds.